Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today we're going to be taking a look at the X99E 10G WS, and the WS stands for Workstation, and it is very much a workstation board as well. It's not a gamery board, despite what you may think when we start looking at the gaming results later on. But the prime kind of feature on this board is the fact it has two 10 gigabit Ethernet ports on the back. So one of those has the possible bandwidth of 10 normal gigabit ports, basically. So with a normal gigabit port, you're probably going to be looking at about 120-ish megabits per second, megabytes per second. I always get them mixed up. I know, I should know by now, but when I try and talk like this and I'm talking so fast, I always get them mixed up. But anyway, we'll say MB. So you get around 120 MB a second through a normal gigabit. This has got 10 of that. So do you know what I mean? We're talking going up to GBs a second now. So that is, in networking talk, that is amazing, because that means we can literally just pummel data through our Ethernet cables much faster. It's not necessarily going to make your internet faster. Well, it's not necessarily, it's not going to make your internet faster. It's all about your home network and everything else that's connected, and I'm going to end up saying about it loads more times throughout the video. But it's a big thing for the right person. It's not necessarily for everyone, but it's a sexy board, and the WS boards genuinely are. So when I got asked, would I like to test it? I was like, yes, of course I would like to test it. So we're going to get into the nitty gritty. We're going to talk about all the PCI Express lanes and all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to talk about results and performance testing as well. But don't forget, there'll be a link underneath and a card and all that kind of stuff. So if you're actually interested in the performance of the board, you can click through to the OC3D website to go and have a look at it. But let's get in and get personal. Oh, yeah. Okay then, so a quick skirt around the board. And really the main reason for this board and why we're all here are these two 10 GBE Ethernet ports. So it's 10 times the bandwidth available as normal gigabit Ethernet. It's 10 gigabit Ethernet, and there are two of them. It's the first time I've seen these directly on what I would call a mainstream board rather than like a server board. And even then, with server boards, they're generally add-in cards. This little bit of heatsink that's actually here, there is a chip underneath it. You can see, if you look carefully, there is a little thermal pad underneath it. And that is the chip for the 10 GBE up here. And it does actually use 4 PCI Express 3 lanes on its own, just to be able to give these the bandwidth that they require. So that should show you the amount of throughput that you can put through it. Now, if you are wondering about 10 GBE, and if you were to connect your Cat5e cable coming from your router, would you then get faster transfers than your old gigabit Ethernet? You won't. If you use 10 GBE, you need a decent Cat6 and upwards. I am actually personally running Cat7s. But you need a proper cable going in, and then anything that's connected to it needs to be 10 GBE as well. So switch, if your internet comes straight in here and it comes straight from your modem, then it's not going to make your internet quicker or anything like that. I hate to be, those of you out there that know about networking, I'm not trying to teach you to suck lemons. I'm just trying to answer any questions for those of you out there that might not necessarily know a great deal about networking. I would say I'm an intermediate user. I'm definitely not a power user. So please put me wrong if I have been. But anyway, so won't magically make your internet or your downloads faster. This is about home networking at home. So if you want to use this, then it needs to be going into a 10 GBE switch or other 10 GBE devices. So it's a very limited use, yes, and it's very professional based at the moment, but it may come through as being a more mainstream thing in the not too distant future. Now, one thing that we can see as well on here is that we have a lot of PCI Express connectors. An awful lot of PCI Express connectors. There are 7 there in total. If you look carefully, I'll just pick it up so I can show you. There is a slight difference in colour. We have grey ones, there are 4 grey ones, and then there are black ones. Well, the grey ones, they're all wired as 16 times, and the black ones are all wired as 8 times. And like I said, there are 7 there in total. Now, there aren't enough lanes available on the chipset, or the CPU rather, to be able to do all of those, because there are 2 types of X99 CPUs. You get the 28 lane ones and you get the 40 ones. We're going to concentrate on the 40 ones because if we go to 28, it gets mega complicated. But anyway, so we have 40 available. But what happens is down here, there are hidden just underneath the chipset, there are two. If you look carefully, you can just see the chips there. Well, they are PLX chips, and they are like lane extenders, and they actually give us much more lanes available. There can be some very slight delay. Some people don't like them for gaming, but again, this is a workstation board and we're just looking for throughput. So it does mean that all of these are 16 lanes, and they do actually get 16 lanes each. You can actually have the top one is 16 and then all of them filled up with 8 times devices, and that's all fed through from the PLX. If I bring the block diagram up, you can see that it's a PLX 8747, there are 2 of them, and it gets a single 16 times Gen 3 going into the PLX. And then what the PLX then does is kind of split it out. It's a little bit kind of complicated the way it does it, but you can see it just essentially gives us all of the PCI Express lanes, which is good. You can also use that block diagram to look at things for the M.2 and the U.2 and the X550AT2, which is basically the 10 GBE chip that I spoke to you about before. And if I bring you back just quickly, just so that we can look at the manual, that is basically all that's hinted me towards the PLX chips, and I couldn't find anything else in this flipping manual to tell me about PLX chips. It really didn't help me very much at all, and I ended up having to search online, but I found out. So we know. So other things on the board that we can talk about, as there are 2 PCI Express, we're stuck there, with 2 8-pin connectors for CPU power at the top. You don't need to use all of those. One thing I can say is with the X99 chipset, people are going to be wondering about Xeons, and again, if we look on the box, it does say here that E5 2600 and E5 1600 V3 and V4 product family. It does mean that some of the new Xeons, like the crazy cord Xeons and stuff, aren't supported, because you do need one of the C2160 chipsets to be able to support that, and this is X99. So in some respects it's a bit limited on the Xeon front. This is more, I think this is kind of like an overclocked workstation kind of scenario, if there was to ever have been one. It very much is kind of blurring the lines between a dedicated server workstation board and something that's got a little bit, you know, other features and overclocking and toys, like the Aura slot down the bottom, so you can connect RGB strips direct to the board. So there are a lot of confusing factors. Even then, we've got like a little op amp on the side that we can swap out. We've got a PCI poster, which is good, helps us fault find. That's all lovely. 2 USB 2s on the bottom, again, very helpful. There are a lot of connectors like AIOs and power supplies and all that sort of stuff that we can bob into these now to monitor, so we like that. I've got an M.2 port here, which is great. It's only up to a maximum of 80 millimeters though, although I've still not had 110 millimeter U.2 come through the door, so maybe the 80 is going to be the international standard. We do have a U.2 connector down here, but these two do share the bandwidth, so you couldn't run both without there being conflicts. We do have a power and reset button down here, 10 SATA ports down the side. We've got 2 USB 3s on board there, and then this is the first of our chassis fans. There's another one down at the bottom of the board here. This one is your water pump. These two here are the CPU ones, and I don't like where they are at all. It's backwards. They should be at the top, out the way, where we can make things tidy. I don't like them there. We're going to leave that. I just think that, yeah. There's also, and I'm looking, because I still can't believe it. There it is. We've got the high amp fan, which is here. Again, I think that kind of needs to be at the top, out the way. I don't particularly think people are going to be using a high amp fan at the back of the case. Maybe they're in, you know, assuming this is going to be in a server case or something. I don't know. The fans on this don't particularly feel right. I don't think that they're catered for to a certain extent, but I don't necessarily think it's kind of in a way that's going to allow you to keep things super tidy should you want to, you know, fill them up, for want of a better term. Now, we've said that we have 2 PLX chips down here. as well as the X99 chipset. And this is why we have all of these extra heat pipes, because it's basically giving you more cooling ability. This heatsink down here isn't actually connected to anything underneath at all. You've got the heat pipe running up here, and this is just to give you extra cooling for what's going on down here. You've got your, at the top, we have our power delivery for the CPU, and you can see that then that goes on and round here. And this is basically an extension of cooling, and it's all kind of sharing it because we've got that chip there that if you do really start hammering it, it can get warm. So this is basically your extension for that, and they've just kind of linked it all up with another heat pipe. It's been a while since we've had so many heat pipes on board, but to be honest with you, the workstation boards do have a habit of ending up that way. Something else with the blingy kind of factor, the PCI Express 16 lanes, the grey ones that I showed you before, do have little LEDs underneath that you can light up and control with the Aura software. You can then make that all sync in with your RGB connector that's down on the bottom as well. There are a couple of handy switches. You've got the SLI config switch here. This is basically to be able to tell the board whether you're running a 40 lane CPU or a 28 lane CPU, and you can look up online or look in the manual to be able to get more details on that. But I would have thought if you end up buying a board of this caliber, you're going to have one of the 40 lane CPUs rather than the cheapest one. You've got an Easy XMP switch. Don't forget with the Easy XMP switch or XMP in all, if you're running crazy speed memory, so you know 3200 megahertz plus upwards, or 64 megabytes plus memory, the Easy XMP may get a little bit finicky, and that's just because of your CPU. It's nothing to do with the board. Your CPU can need a few extra volts, because this can support up to 128 gigabyte of memory on board. But if you were to stack that all right out, and it was, you know, might be a quite fast memory as well, it may need a little bit of manual intervention to be able to get it running. So it might be an idea to get 4 in to start off with, and then try putting the second 4 in. And if you have any problems, take the other 4 out, and then go in and tweak your settings, increasing voltages and stuff. But just keep an eye on the cache and the VCC IO volts to make sure that they're not artificially being absolutely cranked by the BIOS. And that's at this kind of point that you do need to take things into your own hands and bring voltages into check. It will make your CPU last longer. It will bring your temperatures down, and it could end up making things a lot more stable as well. So keep an eye on those sort of things. So yes, that was our walk around the board itself. I'm getting a bit of a dry mouth because I've been talking so much and so fast, so it must be time to move on. So just a quick look at the test system. We've got the 980 at the heart of it. You may wonder why it's just a 980, but it's just because we use it in all of the reviews. Then our final spec that we ended up using for the overclock test was the Corsair Dominator Platinum. It's the ROG Edition sticks, that's 3200 megahertz. Then we've got the M.2 drive down here. We've got round the back an RMI 1000 watt. And then cooling was taken care of by a H110 GT. All the fans and the cooling and all that malarkey. The CPU, we have a 6950X, and it's the same CPU that we use for all of the newer X99 boards as well, again for continuity. So that's the test spec. Time for some results. So on to some testing, and first things first, testing the 10 GBE Ethernet. In all honesty, I don't have enough 10 GBE stuff around for me to be able to test. I really need to be able to get a switch, and it's just something that I've not got. So just to clear up as well, in case people are thinking, oh my God, is 10 GBE going to make my internet faster? It sounds, to those of us into networking, it sounds like a comical kind of, maybe even trolly question, but I do get asked it a lot, especially the difference between certain gigabit Ethernet, so let alone 10 GB. No, it's not going to make your internet faster. That's all down to your connection with your ISP, your internet provider, quality of your line, all that sort of stuff. 10 GB on this is really to do with network transfers depending on the network that you're connected to. So with the 10 GBE, you would need a lot of other 10 GBE components, i.e. a switch, 10 GBE connectors on anything else that you're connected to, like servers and such like. It's really a very high-end enthusiast stroke professional level item at the moment, which is one of the reasons why it's the first time we've seen it on something like this. So what that does mean is if you are in a working environment or you're quite into your home networking and stuff, then the 10 GB actually being on the board means you could be getting rid of your add-in cards and that sort of stuff. Hopefully it's where a lot of the stuff is going to end up going, and we'll end up trickling in like when we went from the 10100 Ethernet up to the Gigabit Ethernet. But we are really reliant on the moment of things like I said, like switches becoming more mainstream. If we could get switches more mainstream and then maybe some lower price add-in cards, then things would start to open up. But at this present moment in time, this is really the sort of thing that's going to be for someone that is maybe like rendering videos professionally for a living or game development, that sort of thing. It's a very kind of up there thing to need 10 GB. Although I know a lot of people have been literally flooding me with questions already, you know, like on a personal level, asking me about this because they're incredibly interested in it. I've got a game developer friend. I've got an actual game developers down the road as well, two separate game developers. But anyway, and they've all been harping on about this and, you know, the possibilities of where it could be going. But it's, like I said, it's very up there. But enough about the 10 GBE. It's something that I was incredibly excited about, I have to admit, and I've even been looking at, like I said, I've been looking at switches, but they're all a bit kind of, yeah, they're like very server room based stuff. There's nothing that's kind of filtered down into a reasonable, let's say like in a Netgear state, because I run a Netgear managed switch at some Gigabit. There's nothing kind of at that's not ridiculous money, and I'm not paying £1,000 for a switch because I'm not made of money. So anyway, that's that. That's why it's a little bit up there. Future proofing, yes, you could be primed and ready. But, you know, is it too soon? I don't know. I think it's really for those of us or those out there that are looking to build a kind of a machine like this, or anyone that's actually going to properly utilise the 10 GB, it's going to be on a professional level. So performance and testing, I've just remembered we've not done the turn-on. So performance and testing, I go through a lot of hassle when I test different components. And if you're not here because you've actually got an interest in how it performed, or you're thinking about spending a lot of your money buying one, then this isn't a quick skim through review, because I tried to give you all of my personal kind of thoughts on it, which can be a little bit lengthy, but that's just, you know, that's just the way I do stuff. So when I test, especially with X99, there's been a lot of memory pickiness. And by that I mean, you put your memory in and it just doesn't boot. Why? Why doesn't it boot? Is my board faulty? Is my memory faulty? No, it's actually normally memory compatibility, although it has got better, significantly better as well, after me beating my head on the walls and trying to help all the manufacturers get it sorted out. But it is getting better. The only kit that we had out of our batch that didn't post and allow us to enter into any kind of settings on the in the BIOS, or even get to the BIOS for that matter, was a 3600 MHz kit, Corsair Dominator Platinum. Now, I'm not particularly worried about that. We only use this for really stressing the memory controller and like the settings on the board to see how far we can get with it anyway. It's actually technically a Z170 speed sort of kit. We have got them running on other boards though. We can never get them running at 3600 MHz. We normally have to turn them back to 3400 MHz. That's normally how we go about it. You know, we do it kind of in a backwards kind of way. But the fact that we have a 3600 MHz kit means we can really, you know, push the boundaries. So that didn't run, although I wasn't particularly bothered. We did have I do have a Corsair Vengeance LED kit, which is 3466. We could get that in, and that was running and everything fine. We were finding the top end of my CPU is about 3400 MHz with decent kind of scores coming out of it. Once you go past 3400 and you go to 3466, the memory scores fall like a lead balloon. That's another reason why when I talk to you about doing overclocking at home, I always say keep an eye on your scores as you go through. Don't just necessarily think the very highest stable score or the very highest stable clock that you can get is necessarily the best performing. You do have to keep an eye on your way up. My CPU, it does get a bit iffy up and around the 34 plus mark. But we got it all running, and all of the other kits that we had, and we've got G-Skill, Kingston, Crucial, lots of G-Skill, quite a few different Corsair kits. Every single one of them went in XMP'd absolutely fine. The one thing that we did have a problem with when the sample first turned up, and that I need to clear this up, when it first turned up, it was on a launch BIOS, so it wasn't even, when I got this board, it wasn't even on the Asus website yet. It wouldn't work with M.2, as in no M.2s worked at all. You put M.2 drive in, it didn't work. I literally got hold of Asus straight away because my boot drive is M.2. I need that to keep the consistency of my testing. I can't just use another drive because it means like things like PC Mark and the like don't work. So I told Asus, they hadn't realised, but they got it fixed and they rolled it out. And that is also that I've made sure before this review went live that the BIOS is on the website. One thing I would say though is if you do get problems, you may be on one of the older ones. So if you go to install your M.2 and it's not popping up and you're using Windows 10, update the BIOS first. If you are using Windows 7 or trying to use Windows 7 or an old M.2 installation of Windows 7, you need to kind of remember that Windows 7 doesn't have the drivers built in for M.2, so you'll run into a lot of problems trying to get Windows 7 installed on any M.2. It doesn't matter whether you're on Z170. There are kind of backwards ways around it, but I'm just trying to be very clear. Windows 10 and you're not getting the M.2, you just need to have a look at the BIOS. If you're using Windows 7 and you're trying to install Windows 7 on it, I understand that some businesses and stuff may still be using it, but you're just going to have to get hold of the tech people because it's a lot more complex in getting them running. I found some backdoor ways in the past to do with actually putting the Windows install on a normal solid state drive and doing it that way. But it just gets incredibly complicated and it's a pain to say the least. But anyway, so Asus have now got it all sorted. I'm well happy with it. Like I said, it's on the website, but if you do get issues, make sure that you're on the latest version of the BIOS for your board, and then you should be gravy. When we moved on to performance and the like, it's a workstation board, so you wouldn't necessarily think that it was going to be an amazing overclocker. Well, I didn't, but it was actually. This is the first of the X99 boards that I've had. Maybe I've been a bit braver in certain points of the voltages, I don't know. But we managed, or maybe it's just the fact that the BIOS code is just advancing across the range of the Asus boards. But it's the first time I've got 4.5 gigahertz actually properly stable on my 6950X. Because I use the same CPU in every review, again for continuity. And we got it stable. 2800 megahertz memory, because that was what I call my stock memory. This is the first set of memory that I put in. It was stable with this and it was fine. When I then tried with the 4.5 gigahertz overclock to then introduce 3000 megahertz Kingston or 3200 megahertz Corsair that's in there now, it didn't like anything above 28. I just didn't matter what volts, what I did, or with sensible volts, I couldn't get it running. So we ended up having to knock it back to 4.4, and we ended up running it with 3200 megahertz memory as well. Although I did say I could get it running at 34, it was a bit shaky again, and the scores had started to drop off with this. So one thing I can say is it doesn't like absolute screaming edge memory, but then again, to be honest with you, some of the other brands struggle getting 3200 megahertz running on the boards, let alone actually booting and being stable and the like at 34 and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very positive thing. 4.4 and 3200 megahertz on my CPU is absolutely bob on, and you'll see it if you click through to the OC3D website. You'll see with all the plethora of the other stuff actually performed quite well. When we look at Cinebench, and don't forget, I have said that we skirt around some of the tests that we do here, but there's a lot more information with all the graphs and stuff on the main OC3D website, so you can go and pick through it if you're actually interested in buying it. Although most people that moan that I don't put enough in the videos have got no interest in buying them anyway. So with Cinebench, you can see when the graph pops up, the stock score was pretty much the top of the pack as far as this is concerned, which is a great kind of like thumbs up for the BIOS engineers, because that's, you know, really where the BIOS kind of counts. It didn't do as well with the overclocks, but it's only beaten by its Asus brethren. And it may seem daft that the X99A overclock is so close, you know, so far up, but it did just, and that was the board that I actually initially reviewed the CPU on as well. But to be honest with you, that overclock was literally blowing the doors off of what was possible with that board, and I spent so much time trying to put that clock in, whereas now I'm not, you know, spending days on end trying to see what's possible. But, you know, it wasn't necessarily a disappointing score, but it wasn't necessarily, like I said, blowing the doors off either. Then when we go on to Prime 95, it's very much the same. You can see stock, it did incredibly well. When we went into the overclock, it was only, you know, bested by a couple of others. So, you know, the scores that it was pumping out were, you know, fairly consistent. It was doing really well at stock, just not quite as well, you know, when overclocked, really. PC Mark 8, loved the stock. Again, didn't particularly like the overclock at all. And I will say at this point, when I was looking through these graphs, I actually went in, retuned my overclock, trying to turn things down, tried to fine tune the overclock, because in some aspects it was making me think that it wasn't quite 100%. And it was just that, you know, it didn't necessarily have an amazing amount more to give. Now that normally then leans me into saying that the BIOS isn't maybe as mature as it could be, and it needs a little bit more fine tuning. You will see when you go onto the websites and you look at the BIOS revisions, you'll see like system stability. That's normally them going in with a bit of polishing cloth and making sure that everything's absolutely tip top, and that normally comes out in the overclock results. So, you know, I'm trying to explain as best I can. You'd be amazed with board performance how much it does come down to BIOS. When we got to gaming, both of them were at the top. 3D wise, it actually seems to go really well, which if you're thinking about the fact that you might be rendering with 3D cards, excuse me, and the like, it's, you know, it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination to imagine that they probably spent a fair bit of time trying to make sure that all the PCI Express and everything is being funneled in within the best of its ability. It does seem a bit funny that some of the calculation-based stuff, that's, you know, memory-based stuff, it wasn't quite right. But then again, we did say at the beginning that, you know, once you get to a certain point, it was getting a bit iffy. Again, I did even try running the overclock with the 2800 megahertz again, and it's just, yeah, I'm sounding rather negative, and I don't mean to be. I'm just trying to give you as much information as possible. So you've got all the results. We had a good old chit chat about the testing. You can see the kind of lengths that I go to make sure I test lots of different stuff. So my overall thoughts of the board were, and outlying the performance of it, you know, at stock was brilliant. I do think another couple of BIOS revisions and the overclocking will change a bit, but you can already see that glimmer there that is saying that it is a cracking board. That 4.5 gigahertz surprised me. It really did surprise me, to the point that I now want to go back and retest the Rampage 5 Edition 10. But anyway, it really did surprise me that it did it without any stress. I didn't have to put a great deal of time into getting it running at all. I think if I'd spent a little bit more time maybe tuning some of the memory voltages and stuff, and by that I mean like the cache and the VCCIO, I reckon I could probably have got the scores up a little bit more, you know, an outside possibility. But all of this was done with trying to keep it to a sensible level, because I'm not a professional overclocker. I can't sit there and go through timings and stuff, because at the end of the day I don't expect you guys to do that either. So I try and kind of keep the balance between knowing the things to play with and not wanting to spend too much time, because that would be unrealistic to expect you guys to, you know, or the wider population to expect those to do it as well. But the numbers that it pumped out were brilliant. Like I said, we only had one problem with memory, and that's not really a problem. That's just the fact that I try so many different things, and it's, like I said, it's such a fast kit. I wouldn't expect it to be on the QVL list anyway. So that isn't even really a problem. The fact that all of the other ones, like the 3466s and all that kind of stuff, went in, they might not have XMP'd, but you wouldn't expect them to, because my CPU won't do it. It's all, by giving you too much information, it can sound like I'm making it sound like a bad product, and it's really not. The screaming, when we're talking about the conclusion though, I've found out that Asus UK aren't going to be releasing the board. And I think I know why, and that's because it's £699. And obviously with all this kind of drama going on with the exchange rates and weak pounds and stuff at the moment, the price is probably going to end up going up anyway. So, you know, it's more expensive than a Rampage. If you were to say to me, should I buy this or should I buy a Rampage? Then if you have to ask that question, then you should be buying a Rampage, because you wouldn't buy this board for the use that it's intended. It is meant to be someone that is going to make use of that 10 GBE. So it's going to be, like I said, it's going to be those 3D editors, game developers, people that are profiling, people that are kind of stacking stuff, people that are really going to be moving an awful lot of data around a network, whether that's going to a server, to and from a server, to NASes, all that type of thing. But you, to want to pay this money, you're going to have to need, and I do mean need rather than want, that 10 GBE. So if you find yourself going, I don't know whether I need to do that or not, if you even have to ask that question, then just buy the Rampage. It's really simple. Buy one of the other X99 boards, because, you know, the other board that you choose is totally down to you. So it is a really weird board, but it was one of those ones where when it came up, because the way things work is you get asked, do you want to review this? Do you want to review this? Do you want to review this? I was genuinely interested about this, but also because going forward, I would love to get on 10 GBE myself. So it was something that I did just want to have a play with, and I am going to end up spending a little bit more time exploring things with my home network. You're probably going to end up seeing the board again and that sort of thing. So I'm just going to leave that there, and you can make your own decisions. It's definitely not one for a gamer, let's put it this way. Well, unless you end up using your rig to do other stuff with at the same time, but it's definitely not one just for a gamer. The price in itself just makes it, you know, that little bit of a step too far, and even though it does perform really well in games, annoyingly, it's not worth that money unless you're a gamer. That's pretty much it. I could have said that in about 30 seconds, I suppose. I get what people say when they say I talk too much. But as I said, I'm just trying to give you as much information as possible. So, long and short of it is, it's an absolutely cracking board, and it costs the earth because it's got some very rare, you know, first I've ever seen it, 10 GBE ports on the board. So it's only really meant for a very, very, very niche amount of people out there, or some absolute screaming edge enthusiasts that just have to have the absolute, you know, most ridiculous stuff. But I genuinely look at this and it makes me excited about where things could be going within the next year or so. Are we going to be getting more mainstream sort of boards with 10 GB on board? I pray for the day that we start getting some decent switches, because I will be chasing them down like a madman, because I want to play with this stuff, because I love a bit of networking. So, with a little bit of a weird conclusion, I apologise if I've kind of been a little bit all over the place, but I've not really known how to kind of structure how to go about it. If you've got any questions, jump onto the OC3D forums, because that's the place that I try and keep my eye on the questions the most. But for now, at least, with the Asus X99 E10G WS, yes, the box is over there, look,